Good evening, barflies and lounge lizards, and tonight we'll be discussing 5 more of my favorite sword and sorcery films. And number 5 on the list is Excalibur from 1981. And you may be thinking number 5 is kind of low on the ranking for films such as Excalibur. But to be honest, I actually just saw it for the first time recently. It was a gift from my good buddy, Jay Super Awesome. So I don't have the nostalgia attached to it as I do the other films on the list. But Excalibur was directed, produced, and co-written by John Boorman, who is probably most famous for Zardoz, which features Sean Connery's finest sling bikini acting performance to date. Though I hear rumors of a sling bikini performance in a special cut of Highlander 2, but I can neither confirm nor deny that at this time. Excalibur is a retelling of the legend of King Arthur and is based on the 15th century works of Sir Thomas Malory. And whereas it is a fairly standard telling of the story, it has a really unusual atmosphere and stylized visuals that make it really quite a sight to behold. And it features early appearances by Liam Neeson, Patrick Stewart, and Gabriel Byrne. And one of the real standouts and probably the most iconic part of the movie was Nicole Williamson as Merlin. Even having just seen it, even I often think of that silver headpiece for Merlin when I think of Merlin. And as I said, it's one I hadn't seen until recently, but I used to see the poster and the VHS tape in the store all the time. And even the poster art is really stylized and unusual looking, making it really stand out. Now, initially, John Boorman wanted to make a Lord of the Rings film. He had a script and everything, but couldn't secure the proper financing. So when that fell through, he went with Excalibur instead, which he actually directed The Exorcist Part 2, a total fan favorite, in order to fund the making of Excalibur. As far as that Lord of the Rings script goes, it was definitely an odd one, and it included, I kid you not, a love scene between Frodo and Galadriel. I mean, clearly that's the Lord of the Rings scene that we've all been missing out on. And number 4 on the list is Conquest from 1983, directed by Lucio Fulci. Yep, that Lucio Fulci. And Conquest tells the story of a young man with a magic bow and an outlaw as they team up to take down a naked witch that wants the bow for evil, naked witch, bow and arrow type reasons. And this is exactly what you would expect from a non-horror Fulci film. It's dreamlike, with full of fog and just strange atmospheric elements, not to mention some gore and sleaze for good measure, and some really unique foes for the heroes to take on. All kinds of weird, cool monsters in this one. It's wonderfully shot, and it's really unique in the fact that it's not your usual medieval fantasy setting. It's almost more Stone Age looking, with the heroes being kind of barely above cavemen. I always thought that was really different. I'm not sure I've really seen much quite like that. And another thing adding to the charm and the mood and the great atmosphere is the score by Claudio Simonetti from the band Goblin, who's quite the score writer, responsible for films such as Deep Red and Suspiria. Now this one kind of flies under the radar for a lot of folks, even folks into sword and sorcery films, but I definitely recommend this one if you want a moody, atmospheric, dreamlike, unusual, Stone Age-esque sword and sorcery film with a lot of sleaze. Now, number 3 on the list, and this was an absolute favorite of mine as a kid, and that's Craw from 1983, directed by Peter Yates. Now, Craw tells the story of a young king putting together a ragtag group of heroes in order to find and save his bride from an evil being called the Beast. But this one really stands out in the fact that the Beast is an alien. So it's in essence a fantasy film meets alien invasion film, because it's swords versus laser staff wielding Giger-esque screaming alien warriors. And another way in which this one stands out is the king's party members. Not only does it have appearances by Liam Neeson and Hagrid from Harry Potter, but also a precognitive Cyclops and a shapeshifter with some Prince Valiant hair. I hadn't actually seen this one since the 80s, but this was actually another gift from a viewer, a good fellow by the name of Tony Santiago, And watching it again, wow, it holds up. It's really a unique one. And it was strangely a box office bomb, which really makes no sense, because other than a 45-minute long scene of the king climbing a rock, it's really unique, very entertaining, and the effects are top notch. The set and alien designs have this really groovy, stylized kind of look to them. And then there's the presentation of the beast. It's kind of hard to explain, but they kind of obscure him, even though he's super cool looking. You just really kind of have to see it to see what I'm talking about. That's some fine YouTubing right there. And then it also features one of the best stop motion spider scenes I've ever seen. Some of the finest stop motion I've ever seen, but definitely the finest stop motion spider scene I've ever seen. Speaking of the effects, there's a scene, a pretty big scene that takes place in a swamp. Really realistic looking swamp at that. Turns out it was a stage at Pinewood Studios, and it just happened to be the James Bond stage. Yeah, this is a really cool movie. If you haven't seen it, check it out. If you haven't seen it in a long time, check it out. Just be forewarned of that 45-minute long rock climbing scene. And on that, we should take some kind of break.
You can imagine in the future, giant robot-controlled warriors will protect the planet Earth. The Starios Armored Battle Station. You put together. Rebel Wasteland So 7.
Naval Waster attacking! Arm the battle station! Attack! Fire rammer! Air attack! Stars attack! Stars save the Earth! Yeah!
The Starios Armored Battle Station comes with everything you see here. Rammer and Wasteland sewed separately. New from Toei.
Prepare thyself well, Dragon Warrior. Thy most challenging quest ever awaits. Go with speed, but go with patience. Seek out an arsenal, a dragon scale, a torch, and magic herbs. Use wisdom and cunning to choose thy commands, for the Dragon Lord is a fierce rival. Horrible and treacherous minions all guard the Evil One's island castle. Art thou ready, young one?
Yes, King Lord.
And so begins a new epic, Dragon Warrior.
Nintendo, now you're playing with power.
And we're back with number 2 on the list, and that's Deathstalker, also from 1983, directed by Jack Watson. Now, Jack Watson is actually a pen name, but I can't pronounce the guy's real name, so we're going to stick with Jack Watson. But Deathstalker was a Roger Corman production and was the first in the 4-part yet completely unrelated Deathstalker series. It starred Rick Hill, Barbie Benton, and Lana Clarkson, and Deathstalker tells the story of Deathstalker, who's sent on a quest by a witch to find magical items, and 2 of the said items are in the possession of an evil, magic-wielding king. Along the way, he meets a topless warrior woman, and hijinks ensue. As I mentioned in part 1 of the video, I often go back and forth between which is my favorite, Deathstalker 1 and Deathstalker 2. Deathstalker 1 is darker, much more serious, and far sleazier. But as I said in part 1, I just like the lighter, more fun nature of part 2. But either way, both great films. So if you're looking for the darker, more serious, more sleazy side, check out part 1. But also, as I mentioned in the first video, you can really watch them in either order since they're unconnected. You can look at them as 2 totally different films. It really doesn't matter. The only thing that carries over is the name Deathstalker. Now, Deathstalker Part 1 would lead to not only the aforementioned sequels, 4 and all, but to the film Barbarian Queen, which was also produced in Argentina and also starred the late Lana Clarkson. And you really can't talk about Deathstalker without mentioning the very memorable poster art by Boris Vallejo. I used to actually see this one as well as I think 2 and 3 at a grocery store we used to shop at when I was a kid. Back in the day when they kind of would rent videotapes everywhere. And in my hometown, 2 of the most common places were gas stations and grocery stores. And I used to always see the cover art. Never rented them for whatever reason, but always used to see them and enjoy them. And number 1 on the list is Fire and Ice, also from 1983. Wow, 1983, that was a good year for sword and sorcery. Guess the big Conan boom. But this one was directed by Ralph Bakshi. And you ever look at a Frank Frazetta photo and imagine it coming to life, moving around on the page and not being freaked out by it? That's exactly what this is. Fire and Ice is an animated film and a collaboration between filmmaker Ralph Bakshi, as I said, and Frank Frazetta. And man, what a collab it is. And it tells the story of an evil queen and her son who kidnap a rival princess and some warriors that come to save her. Now, it's pretty simple setup, but it is magnificently done. And it is pretty much the pinnacle of 70s and 80s fantasy. When I think that old school fantasy look, this is exactly what I see in my mind. It's an amazing looking film, and it even manages to stand out amongst other rotoscoped films. And in case you don't know what rotoscoping is, it's a process where they would film live action actors and then animate over them. And being rotoscoped, one would expect all the voices to be dubbed or none of them to be dubbed. Yet this one appears to be a mix of the two, with Bakshi kind of jumping back and forth. For example, the princess, the main character, pretty much, was dubbed by another actress. Now, it's really surprising to me that this one not only wasn't a huge success, but it didn't go any further. No sequels, no spin-offs, and it is just so cool looking. Now, two of the writers of this film, Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway, were both comic book writers and had both served as editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics back in the 70s. As I said, this is just an amazing looking film, and it's really entertaining too. So if you've ever been a fan of Frazetta, I highly recommend checking this one out. And if you're a fan of sword and sorcery and fantasy type stuff, I highly recommend checking this out. And if you're a fan of great animated rotoscoped movies, I recommend checking this out. And that's all the time we have for this week. Please like, comment, subscribe, and keep it wacky.
Wow.